Welcome, folks. It appears that it is 7 p.m. Everybody has long ago made their clock adjustments, I'm sure. So it's 7 o'clock tonight, and this is the fourth in our speaker series. Next week is Reverend Jeff Chalmers, a Presbyterian minister who became a United Church minister and now serves half-time a United Church in Hamilton and full-time as a prison chaplain in the Hamilton jail. So he's going to be with us next week, and that is our last in this series. So I want to thank you for being part of it. And tonight, thrilled to have Blair back from Abbotsford and Malawi. I first met Blair at Gracefield. I was up there as a chaplain or doing a workshop or something, and I saw this young guy who was in a leadership role with the marvelous young people at Gracefield Camp. So I just kind of watched him over the years and got to know him, and then was so fortunate to have Blair available to come to Trinity as a youth minister. Those were the days when he was working 2 or 3 or 4 part-time jobs and took us on as part of that. And that was a tremendous experience. And thankfully, Blair and I have maintained contact, intermittent though it's been by times over the years. I think when you were doing your doctorate degree at Princeton, Blair, didn't didn't our family appear there while you were working there or
Yeah, you
studying
were
there?
you were doing some wild adventure in Pennsylvania and thought, oh, I'll just swing over to New Jersey, you know, which for most people tonight, they're thinking Pennsylvania, has it been called yet? New Jersey, did it go red? Did it go blue? But yes,
Yes, we
we
saw
were
you
there.
there, and that was great. Did not make it to Malawi, but I love seeing the photos that you've been posting lately on Facebook of 8 to 9 people on a bicycle, a strong fellow riding the bike, and 8 or 9 kids attached to him and the bike at various spots. Um, yeah, so I'm really, I I am kind of conflicted in regard to mission work. I remember coming home from Vernon, where I was working for years as interim moderator, and I heard Stephen Lewis talking about, um, I think it was all about the malaria nets and all of the other things that the Stephen Lewis Foundation was doing for people in Africa. And I thought, oh my gosh, I've got to be part of this somehow. And then after Stephen Lewis finished talking about the difference that his foundation was making in the lives of African people, I wish I could remember her name, but Joy, you will appreciate that sometimes to my Canadian tongue, African names just, I have a very difficult time with them. But I wish I could, somebody here, Blair or Joy or Basil, someone might know her name. Very, very bright, educated, articulate woman. And what she was saying is, North America, stay away. Let us find our solutions to our issues. And she was so compelling that I immediately disconnected from the Stephen Lewis Foundation and hopped to the extreme other side. Yes, yes, that makes perfect, good sense. So I've always been a little bit conflicted when it comes to mission work, and through Presbyterian World Service and Development, we hear about different crises that happen with typhoons or fires or whatever in different countries around the world. And then you look at all the opportunity there is for mission here at home. So I'm really happy that you have said yes to speak and present tonight, Blair. And I see some people around gathered on the Zoom service who have had some experience with mission work locally, nationally, and internationally. So I think we're going to have a great discussion following your presentation. So um, thrilled that Blair and his wife Vivian and their three amazing kids now live in Barrhaven. So we're going to have lots of opportunity to be with Blair and his family. So it's a joy and a thrill and a privilege to welcome you tonight, Blair.
Before you start, Blair, can I ask everybody to just to help with this to turn off your videos and turn off your microphones? It'll just help with the bandwidth. Thank you.
Great. I won't turn off my video or sound. How does that sound? Yeah, well, it's good to be here. Thanks, Sean. Sean also came to Abbotsford and hung out with us and our family there, and quickly decided that Zoe, our now 8-year-old, was definitely his favorite, and and I think that continues. So I'll show a picture of her so that you have a picture of cuteness, that if I say anything that's offensive, then you can remember I have a cute daughter. There we go. My plan is to talk a little bit about who I am, talk about a little bit about what might be the difference between mission and missional, and then to talk about 5 things that I've learned about that. And one of those things will touch on what Sean is talking about. He's not the first to have this idea, and the Articulate Woman is not the first. In fact, one of the it came most famously through a Kenyan missionary in the 70s who wrote a famous article, gave a famous speech called "Missionary Go Home." And so there has always been some debate about that. And so we'll talk about that a little bit later. Before I started, though, I guess you all just muted and turned off your camera, but I wondered whether there were any things that I really needed to touch on in our time, things that like you're on this Zoom to find out this. And if there is something that is this, then you need to tell me so I can talk about it. So if you have something, you can either put it in the chat, I guess, or you can unmute and tell me right now. That would be great. Not seeing anything. All right. I am going to share my screen. Denny had me put some pictures together quickly, and just to try to introduce a little bit about what I do or what I've been doing. And let's see here. Can you see a picture? I need somebody at least to give me a thumbs up or a nod or something that you can see a picture of 2 fellows on a bike and 2 fellows standing on a road. Can you see that, Sean? Great. So as Sean said, for the past 3 years, I've been living in Malawi with my family in a house that if you're Presbyterian, that you own, called Canada House in Blantyre. And one of the things that needs to get cleared up right near the start is that the Presbyterian Church in Canada does mission work in various ways. And one of them is through Presbyterian World Service and Development, which Sean talked about. And their focus is clearly on development and on relief operations. So Malawi was hit by a cyclone a couple of years ago, and hundreds of thousands of people were left homeless, and there was cholera outbreak and all these sorts of things. And PWS&D partnered with local organizations to get relief to the people in Malawi. And so I had some involvement in that, but the other part of the church that does mission work is called International Ministries. And what we do tends to be longer term and often staff appointments with partner churches. Some of you might be familiar with Paul McLean, who has been translating the Bible into indigenous languages in Taiwan for a long time. He's an appointment from International Ministries. You met Joel Sherbino if you were on this call, and Joel's work in the prison is in International Ministries. And so, in fact, Joel and I partner on some of that, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But one of the things that we have supported for a long time is something called the Indirandi Handicap Center, and it is as the name would suggest, is part of the is a ministry that does work with handicapped people in this neighborhood that you can see in the background there. I'm not sure that it's very clear, but there are likely about 400,000 people that live in there. Remember that only 10% of people in all of Malawi have access to electricity. And in this place, even fewer will have access to, there's no public sanitation. So it's 400,000 people living in this place, and there's no services that are provided. And so the Presbyterian Church in Canada has partnered with a local organization for a long time who looks after children and albinos, children who have handicaps of various kinds, and albinos, to run programming and to try to help. And for years, they've been renting a space. And what they've recently done is they've recently purchased some land. And the Presbyterian Church in Canada has put a big fence around the land that I think that you can see there. And you can see these are banana trees or banana plants, and you can see that some of them are in here. And the plan is for the Indirandi Handicap Club to be able to use this plot of land to build a hall, essentially, that they could then rent out, that they could use for the purposes of their club, but that they could also rent out. So these are just pictures from the construction. You can see in the distance that there are some sort of cabin shanties up at the top. This is these posts here are outside the wall. They're going to be another church, and this is a borehole, meaning a well that is inside the compound. So this is not a big project in lots of ways. It's let me see if I can bring up some other pictures here. It's not a big project, and but what it's doing is it's trying to empower a small group of people who would not otherwise have any access to resources. And by not big, I mean I think that in this year where we've given more than we would ever normally give, we gave about $25,000 to them, and that allowed them to build this whole wall. And so what International Ministries does is often small scale projects that somebody like PWS&D would never pick up. It's not something that they would do, but it has a tangible effect on the lives of people. Here you can see my three children. This is Garrett, and this is Zoe, and this is Sage, and these are our next door neighbors.
Hasn't changed, Blair. Blair, the picture hasn't changed.
What's that?
You're still on the, you'll have to unmute.
Okay.
And then reshare.
How's that?
Yeah, we see people now.
Okay, now you see Garrett, and you see Zoe, and you see Sage, and these are our next door neighbors. So just to the right of Garrett is the house that you own. You can see that this is taken during maize season, so the growing season. right outside their house, and this is the wall to their house. I'm taking these pictures of our neighbors. Their house, this is the family that lives there, is about 14 feet by 10 feet maybe, for these four people. It does change a little bit. She's a single mom, but these are relatively typical Malawians. They all farm, and they live in small brick buildings, which are relatively secure, but also obviously quite small, without power and without plumbing. Our three kids, and then some of the other neighbor kids in front of the maize. Maize is a ubiquitous crop. And so there we go. There's another view of the property you can see. So I'm going to whip through some of these. I was thinking that it was going to go. No, give me a second here. Just wanted to show you a couple of other things. My real job in Malawi has been to be a professor. I teach at their largest college. I teach ministerial students and I teach non-ministerial students, but I also teach in an outfit called TEAM, which is Theological Education by Extension Malawi. I don't know if Joel talked about what we do in the prisons, but the Presbyterian Church, again, through Joel and through small scale partnerships with church organizations, the PCC built a chapel in the largest prison in the southern region. It's the second largest prison in the country, but it's a huge prison. And we built a chapel, and there's actually a functioning congregation there. I think Denny said that you guys have a session meeting on Tuesday. Well, they have a session that is inside the prison, because these people are there for a long time. And so if they're going to worship, they need to have some kind of organization. And so TEAM, which is Theological Education by Extension Malawi, we provide training for elders. And so we actually provide training for elders outside of the prison, but also inside of the prison. And so I've been involved in that project, and then just normal teaching, which again is not something that PWS&D would do, but I'm equipping between 20 to 30 students per year, who are then going to go out and be the most educated and most likely the most powerful people in their communities, to go out and to do things, both to proclaim the gospel, but also to be able to work with all kinds of organizations. For Malawians, salvation is both a spiritual event and a physical event. So the two things go together. So let me bring up a picture of a student. We have, this is Lucy. Lucy is now a minister in the Presbyterian Church in Malawi. It has about 1.5 million people in it, in just the southern region, so likely around 6 million in the country of 19 million. This is Gerald. He's also now a minister in front of the sign. And we received a big gift from Joseph Kang, who was a missionary for 11 years, and at one point was the principal of the college. He's a Korean, but an American, and he gave thousands of dollars worth of books to the library. So if you're retiring and giving away your books, I may have a place to give them away. This is the library, and so this is Jane, one of our library assistants, very enthusiastic about getting her picture taken. Here she is. You could see that the library is quite old. So this is Chitsulo. This is the principal of the college. Not only do we support him through my presence, but we supported him in his doctoral studies, which he would not have been able to do otherwise. And so he has a PhD in Old Testament from a university in South Africa, and is one of the leading scholars in Malawi. And here he is with a minister who helped to translate one of the first. He was the first ordained Malawian in the Presbyterian Church, and he wrote a book. And this fellow here translated it into English so that others could read it. It was originally written in the early part of the 20th century. You can see the library is not particularly sophisticated, but it is one of the best theological libraries in the country. And then this is another student, Mowbray, and another student. So there's some pictures. I could come back to some other pictures, but what I wanted to get to was, in the title, I talked about being a missional area rather than a missionary. And some of you might have picked up on that, and some of you might have not really cared. That's fine. What do I mean by that? And really what I'm talking about is in some ways what Sean was alluding to, is that our understanding of mission has had to change over the years. And one of the ways that it's changed is that mission has traditionally been about what we, the church, are going to go and to do. And it assumes that we have something that needs to be brought, whether that's material resources or whether that's the gospel. In either of those cases, we bring what it is to people who are lacking and who don't have that. And our mission is therefore to provide. We have all of the answers, we have all of the resources, and so we are in many ways in charge. And so that's what people don't want in terms of missionaries, because it's very colonial and it disempowers those who are receiving, and there's lots of other things. But it's also theologically tricky, because what it does is it places the emphasis on our action, not on God's action. And what the missional movement has tried to do is to say, no, actually, it's God who has already gone to wherever it is. And what we are doing is we are going and we are somehow cooperating with what God is already doing in that place, whether that place is Malawi or whether that place is someplace in your neighborhood or local or in Ottawa or wherever it might be. God, it assumes that God is already there, already doing something, that our role is to listen and to participate with what God is doing. It's not to say that we don't have a role, we do. I think that I'm the only, for a couple of years, I was the only white person on staff, and I brought certain gifts to the staff at Zomba Theological College, things that they don't have, but that they wanted. Did I have all of the answers? No, but I think that if we think about it in terms of what's our spiritual gift that is going to meet what God is doing at a certain place at a certain time, then we start to get at what missional might mean. And we could talk about that some more, and we likely will. But when I say that I'm a missional area, it doesn't mean that I have the answers or that I'm bringing all the resources. What it means is that God is already at work at the church in Malawi, and I have gone and have participated in that to the best of my ability. And one of the things, if I was to summarize these 5 things that I'm going to talk about, is that we are more culture bound than we like to let on. That our culture shapes the way that we see things and the way that we think about things more than we let on. There's a famous commencement speech by David Foster Wallace, who says, he tells this little joke, which is, there are these 2 young fish swimming along, and they happen to meet an older fish swimming the other way, who nods at them and says, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" And the 2 young fish swim on for a bit. And then eventually one of them looks over at the other and goes, "What the hell is water?" The joke is that we would think that fish should know what water is, but because they're always in the water, they don't know what it is. We just take the air that we breathe for granted. And that's the way it is with lots of the ways that we view the world. And so, one of the great things about having a chance to live in another country for as many years as we did is that I got removed out of the water and placed in another place and had to try to figure out how they saw the world. So, the first thing that I learned, and being a missionary, is that vampires are real and witches really do travel on brooms. Vampires are real and witches really do travel on brooms. When we first got there, there was the U.S. Embassy is quite a bit more active than the Canadian consulate, which is based in Mozambique, which is nowhere near Malawi. And we were getting all these warnings because the bloodsuckers were around. There's a legend, and it's been going on and off for the better part of a century in Malawi, that there are bloodsuckers that come at the night and they come into your home and then they suck the blood, which is really the life, out of you, and then they leave. And there are lots of sociological explanations for why this belief persists, but believe me, it was real. People died because they were accused of being bloodsuckers and they were lynched, and then the police were out hunting for people, and there were police stops and all kinds of things. So, so the effects of this belief are very, very real. Front page news, all this sort of thing. And not only is it seems real, but it's plausible to people in Malawi. Just as it's plausible that there are witches that fly to South Africa and back in a night on their broom. This is one of our staff people who is telling us this story of a witch. Now, we could dismiss this as superstition, but what I think the thing that I'd want us to take away from it is that for many in the rest of the world, these aren't superstitions. These are a spiritual reality that has impact in everyday life. And sociologists will call it an enchanted society, meaning that spiritual things can have an impact in the physical world. And we might, in the West, we've tried to sever that tie. We've made religion something that's private. We've made religion something that is less supernatural. And that might be not to our benefit. Because when we start to sever the tie between a spiritual reality that can have an impact in the world, then we start to put God outside of the frame of what is actually possible. For a Malawian, the spiritual can be real, and in that, they both take evil seriously, but they also take God quite seriously. And I think it's something that we have lost, and we've intentionally lost in our secularism, that we might reconsider. Second thing is that poverty is not just financial. And I touched on this a little bit, I think, in the sermon that I gave at Trinity a little while ago, around the fact that Malawians are generally some of the poorest people in the world, but they are also some of the most joyful people in the world. And North Americans often are some of the richest people in the world, but we are also the ones with the most increased amount of depression and other forms of despair. And I don't think that the relationship between those two things is accidental. I already described just the abject poverty that was right beside our home. A small house, brick, steel roof, no power, no plumbing, lots of people. But you saw the smiles on their face, and they're not disingenuous. They have a real joy. And some of it comes from knowing that God loves them and continues to provide for them. And for those who don't need to be provided for, it's difficult maybe to receive God's bounty. And God's bounty is mostly about God's grace. So it may be a challenge to us to receive God's grace because we do have so much. Whereas in Malawi, um, they are financially poor, but maybe spiritually rich. Third thing is that time passes differently. Um, Sean got on here, and even Sean got us to start at 7 o'clock. That was pretty impressive. Like he's retiring, so I can roast him just a little bit about that. But in Malawi, I did not go to a staff meeting or any meeting whatsoever that started on time. And ending, it just ended when it ended. One minister, when I asked how long I should preach, he says, Abusa, which means minister. Abusa, we don't hurry God in Malawi. And they don't. So if the Spirit shows up after an hour of preaching, all right, no stress. Whereas people in North America, we would be stressed. And some of it has to do with where the priority is. For us, productivity and getting things done is very important. And for a Malawian, being with somebody else and being in relationship, whether that's God or whether that's with your colleagues, is more important than getting things done. People are more important than things. And so if it takes longer, as long as I'm in relationship with somebody, then there's no problem there. That's totally fair and totally what should happen. Fourth thing is that hangovers aren't just for Saturday mornings. And hangovers aren't just for Saturday mornings or Sunday mornings, I guess, if you're out on Saturday night. But and this is where we start to get to where Sean was pushing at the start. Malawi has what I call a colonial hangover. You saw some pictures. I'm not sure if any of those pictures, but all of those ministers will wear a collar all the time. And it's not traditional African garb, Malawian garb to wear a collar. It's colonial garb. And it represents a certain amount of power and it represents a certain position in the society. And there is, even in the fact that I can go and teach and not have to learn another language, is already telling that English is the language of education. It is the lingua franca that draws together a bunch of different people group with different languages, but language is the language of power. These are the colonial vestiges that are still there. Malawian judges wear white wigs and wear academic robes, just like they do in England. So I do think that there is something that it takes time to be able to figure out what is the relationship that's happened in the past and what should the relationship be like as we move forward. I have fights with my colleagues because they say, yeah, we know that English is the dominant language and it's not our language, but we want to be able to speak with the rest of the world. We don't want to just stay in our own people group. So we have to figure out a balance between using our own vernacular language and using English as this other language. And I do think that there's a role for people who are outside of that to help and to be able to help people navigate that relationship. So the fifth thing is that the newcomer brings a sharp knife. The newcomer brings a sharp knife. And the first time that I heard this, I had made a suggestion at a meeting, and Malawians are quite deferential, meaning they're not like I won't name names, but some people can be quite direct in their criticism or their way that they like to do things. Certain cultures are more direct. I've experienced Dutch culture to be quite direct. Maybe Harm would want to correct me on that, but whatever the case, as a culture, Malawi is deferential. And
I
but
caught
I
that.
jumped in. You caught that? There we go. Glad you're listening. I didn't call out Brian Lawton. He's kind of direct too, so we could be fair on that. So I jumped in with a solution, and it was clear that all of my other colleagues, like this was a big deal. And then somebody said something in Chichewa, and I thought that I was in big trouble. Chichewa is the language of the vernacular language. And then the principal, Chitsulo, who you saw, translated it. Yeah, I'm sorry, Brian. And he translated it and said, "Oh no, don't worry. It just means that the newcomer brings the sharp knife." And I'm like, great. Now they think not only did I come for a fight, but I brought my sharp knife to stab them with. I'm really going to have to call Toronto, and I'm going to be going home soon. Then he went on to give the interpretation of it. It's a proverb, and this is one of the other things, is that lots of time wisdom and other cultures deal in proverbs. And it means that the group has been cutting a problem, a knotty problem, with their knives for so long that their knives are dull. And the newcomer brings the sharp knife and can go whoosh, and cut the knot, cut the problem, while everybody else has been working on it. And it's a good thing that the knot gets cut, and it's a good thing that the newcomer comes, and it's something that they bring to the table. And I do think that there's something about that, and it works both ways. That I was the newcomer in Malawi, and I wonder what kind of newcomers into the Presbyterian Church or into our world, what they might bring. What are the problems that we've been trying to solve and haven't been able to solve? But also, what solutions are they bringing that we can't even see at the moment? And an openness to that newcomer to be able to cut the knotty problem is, I think, pretty critical to any kind of missional engagement. I don't have a clock running. Do I have 4 more minutes?
No
Denny,
problem.
is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So those 5 things lead to 5 questions, which I think that Trinity or whatever church you can go and tell my friend Christine in Thedford that we had this conversation, and you can ask her these 5 questions as well. But the first question, which is vampires are real and witches really do travel on brooms, is where do we see God at work in the world? Where do we see God at work in the world? Not where we are working in the world, but where do we see God working in the world? And this is going to take practices of discernment and prayer. And for us, I think a lot of time it's difficult just to rest and to sit back and to pray and to discern what somebody else is doing, but that's what is required, I think. Second, which is poverty is not just financial, is how can we know when we have enough? How do we know what is enough? And I think that some of this relates to practices of fasting, which is not a particularly popular form of practice in a lot of places, but it is in Malawi. And in part because what it does is it helps train us and helps us to consider what is enough when we don't have enough. So the third question would be, which is time passes differently, is how can we slow down to pay attention to the other, whether that other is another person or whether that other is God? How can we slow down to pay attention to the other person or God? And these are practices of Sabbath, where we pause our doing and we are attentive to what God is doing, and we are attentive to the people who are around us and in recreation. Fourth, which is hangovers aren't just for Sunday mornings. In what ways can we listen to those we have talked to for so long? In what ways can we listen to those we have talked to for so long? And these are practices of listening and genuine engagement with people who we have maybe in the past engaged with while we've held the power, and it's time to give them some power to listen in turn. And then fifth, which is the newcomer brings the sharp knife. Who are the newcomers into our community, and what sharp knives do they bring? And these are practices of evangelism and engaging and inviting new people into this story of Jesus Christ that we've been participating in. So that's what I had prepared. I got lots of time, and I have more pictures, but so I'll let you guys steer us from here.